I So I'd like to thank everybody for giving up their time. We value that, and we value your contribution to come along to events like this. It helps with Living Streets Scotland's learning, and it also hopefully will help with your learning about some of the issues we work on with communities and with local authorities. Because I think what we know is walking is really important, but we still haven't cracked it in terms of making it a key part of public policy, despite all the good aspirations. So this is really today to kind of break that down a little bit and work out what's happening. I'd like to thank first of all, the Living Streets team for pulling this together, and my colleague Danielle Angelini, who did a lot of the production behind this, but can't make it today because she's not well, which is unfortunate. But we will send her the recording to show what has happened. And Transport Scotland, who support this work, and the Big Lottery, who also we did some of the lessons are on the back of projects we did with them. So this is for people that weren't at the last seminar, this is the second of two seminars. The first time round, we looked at the need for systemic change around about space, networks, and thinking in terms of walking policy. But we then rapidly started talking about getting the basics right. And that was good for everyone, but I think everybody identified it's especially important for disabled people, older people, and children in terms of the level of provision and environment we provide for them. And I think it was acknowledged that there was basic provision missing within our walking environment of things that people need to feel comfortable and safe and be encouraged to just get out and enjoy their neighbourhoods and travel by foot to local facilities. Today, we're going to move that on a little bit, and we're going to explore one kind of micro issue, which has big implications in depth, which we're going to look at benches and the importance of places to rest on street and how difficult it is to put in place what should be quite a simple piece of infrastructure in terms of finding the space, finding the systems, doing the community consultation, all that goes behind actually making quite a small change to the street environment. And these are the sort of changes that we see are critical for 20-minute neighbourhoods. So that's why we're doing the seminar. And we'll hopefully be able to discuss them with you later on. We will be having a break about between 10:35 and 10:45, and then we're going to go into breakout rooms. So please stay around for those. That's where I think the interesting discussion is going to happen. And then we will come back for this kind of plenary and a wrap up on what we've learned, and we will share the discussion from those groups, and we'll aim to be finished well before 12 o'clock if we can. That's the plan. I'm not going to say any more now. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Chloe, who is going to kick things off.
The purpose of this presentation is to discuss the complexity of the process of Living Streets Out and About groups experienced trying to make small infrastructure changes within their local community. To give you some background, since 2018, Living Streets have worked across Scotland delivering walking connects and out and about projects. These projects highlighted the importance of walking and walkable communities, working in partnership with older adults, making it easier for participants to keep active, increase their well-being and stay connected through walking. Our project supported local groups to take action for on-street improvements by identifying the barriers to walking safely and easily within their local communities. The Out and About group models promotes healthier lifestyles, builds the confidence and skills of group members, supporting them to have their voices heard and to coordinate action. The Out and About group model came from our work with older adults, however it is relevant to all communities, especially within the current interest in living locally and our ongoing work with 20-minute neighbourhood projects. The Scottish Government has made 20-minute neighbourhoods a priority in the proposed new national planning framework. 20-minute neighbourhoods are where people can find most of their daily and weekly needs within a short walk of their home or short walk to good public transport connections to access these amenities. Living Streets are currently working across a number of 20-minute neighbourhoods in North Lanarkshire, Stirling and Dunblane. But what happens if people find it challenging to undertake a short walk to access local amenities or public transport connections? During our work with Out and About groups, group participants identified a large number of barriers to walking safely and easily across Scotland. These are just some of the examples to barriers to everyday walking, essential walks to local schools, shops, going to local community groups or doctors. Real, everyday life walking experiences for everyone. As we see, these barriers include the risk of having to walk on roads due to pavement parking, trip hazards from poor pavement surfaces, or having to negotiate pavement clutter. The Out and About groups also identified that the feeling of being unsafe or having to walk in unpleasant environments are also barriers to everyday walking. So why have we chosen to discuss benches in this webinar? The lack of benches or resting places has highlighted the Out and About groups, especially in local authority areas where there was a long walk to and from bus stops or local amenities, and where these walks involved having to go up hills. As you will see in this photo, community members even had to take action to provide their own chairs and bus stop shelters. The COVID pandemic raised the importance for the need for social connection and the benefits of being more physically active. But during COVID, we witnessed what few benches we have were being taped off. This increased the fear for some people of not feeling confident to be able to go outside for a walk or to go to local shops without having somewhere to rest, creating a feeling of social isolation and increased loneliness. So the need for more benches became even more relevant to all members of society. Recent initiatives have highlighted the benefits of having somewhere to rest and connect with others. These include the bright yellow chatty benches in Northern Ireland, rainbow benches in North Ayrshire, and Netflix supporting the installation of benches following the recent programme Afterlife. I now want to show you a short film which highlights some of the challenges an Out and About group faced trying to install benches within a town setting. The participants of this Out and About group have a mixture of different skills, experience and knowledge, but they were faced by a number of challenges just trying to make small infrastructure changes within their local community. Unfortunately, these changes were also magnified by COVID. You will notice that most of the filming has been undertaken in Edinburgh. This was due to COVID travel restrictions, but more importantly, you will notice the majority of the benches filmed are in parks. This is because we couldn't find many benches in town setting areas on routes to shops, schools or bus stops. We're also aware one of the participants discusses the length of time waiting for a bus. Obviously, this is different in a large populated area compared to rural setting. I hope you enjoy the film. Between 2018 and 2021, Living Streets worked with various local authorities and Out and About groups to install community benches in Scotland. The following film reflects on the complexity of this experience.
To be honest, I was approached by a local community councillor to come along to a meeting, a Living Streets meeting, about installing benches in your community. And I was a bit kind of like, oh, yeah, it's just a bench. What's this about? So I went along and we did a lot of community engagement, going on the bus, trying to find out how people could access transport. And it then struck me, and I suppose it was even after the benches were installed, just how important they were to the community. Because obviously elderly people, it was getting them out. There were some that were actually housebound because they couldn't walk the length of their street to get to the bus stop to come down to the town. Or young mothers even accessing the park, which is at the other end of the estate that they live on. So it was then that I actually realised that there's some projects you get involved in that are really quite, you think are really big, but a bench is really important in a community. It's a conversation that has to be had with the community about what they would want. I feel very strongly about that.
It is hard to go up the hill because of the steepness of the hill. Simple as that. The folk are quite happy to walk down the distance. When they're wanting to come back, they've got to wait for a bus, which is every hour.
When I initially did this, they came back with you can go on to the council website and it will tell you how to have a memorial bench installed. So I was surprised at that because that wasn't my question. My question was a bench for a local community. It then highlighted basically that there was nothing in place for a community to actually ask for a bench. thought that installing a bench would be very straightforward, but we kept coming across a lot of difficulties through the council, and eventually it took about a year and a half before we actually got the final benches installed, and that was the council that created these kind of barriers. We would get some people within the kind of partnership who were really quite negative about it, and you would get other ones within the partnership who were very positive and very supportive and would go that wee bit further. But I think it also highlights the need for a process to be in place at council so we can make it simpler. It doesn't have to be difficult, and as we said, it is only a bench. Maybe some of the people at council don't have a knowledge of this because they've never been asked before. So we have to make it easier then. We should look at that as a council and have, processes put in place, something simple that local communities could look at, and you go through the process installing benches in your community.
It's brilliant. You're speaking to them and you're getting them involved. That's what makes all the difference.
I think, let's face it, if we want people to live locally, we have to make it easily accessible for everything. So I think that's the main thing we have to think about.
I now want to go into more detail of some of the challenges the film highlights and explain what this out and about group experienced during their work installing benches. Living Streets provided the funding to supply the recycled plastic benches for this project. As I said previously, the out and about group participants have a wide range of skills, knowledge and experience, including councillors, community members and participants, including a large council-approved construction and civil engineering company that was managing a large-scale project in the local authority area. The key partner in this work was the local authority. However, as the councillor said in the film, the only link on the local authority website was to install a memorial bench. There's no equivalent to apply to install a bench that was in a local route to shops, schools or bus stops in a town setting. This highlights the lack of understanding of what walking infrastructure is and why it's important. By not having a clearly defined process, it resulted in time delays, lengthy discussions, and the creation of additional work for out and about group members. There was an expectation on the council officer involved that the out and about group had to undertake additional requirements before the benches could be installed. Much of this additional work required a level of technical knowledge and skills for the group. COVID also created challenges as face-to-face meetings were not allowed, so all group meetings had to be online and the site visits were limited to 2 people. Due to COVID, the out and about group were also unable to undertake public consultation meetings, so the group undertook a large-scale community consultation across different formats. The results from the community consultation demonstrated the strong desire of the local community to have these benches installed within this particular area. So following on from the successful community consultation, the out and about group were then asked by local council officer to consider and provide a wide range of additional elements before the benches could start to be installed. These included location maps for benches so utility plans could be applied for, negotiate liability and legal concerns with partners on land ownership and provide written agreements with these partners. Consider concerns of the placement of benches in relation to the risk of trees, root systems and branches in all weathers. The out and about group also had to undertake a tendering process for the installation of 3 bus stop benches, which had to be undertaken by approved council contractors. Despite having to develop and gain new skills to overcome these additional considerations and the impact on the time frame to install the benches, the out and about group felt that by responding to the community's needs for these benches just made them more determined to overcome these challenges, and 7 benches and 3 bus stop benches have now been installed. but it shouldn't have had to have been this difficult and challenging for this small group to make small infrastructure changes. If this is what it's like for other community groups, think of the impact this will have on our 20-minute neighbourhoods. So following from the learning from this project, I now just want to give a suggested overview of a small infrastructure change project process. I will use the installation of benches as my example. Start with the local community. Identify the need for the local infrastructure change and undertake an in-depth community consultation. Advertise the consultation through a large range of different platforms and formats. Involve the relevant local authority team and find the right person. In each local authority, the relevant team or officer is not always obvious, but it's crucial to the process, so get them on board early. Ensuring they see the positive value of the walking infrastructure change is important. Some local authorities need very little persuasion, while others need to be convinced of any added value to the community. You don't need to be a technical expert. It's essential to work in partnership with the relevant local authority staff who have the technical knowledge, skills and resources. That's why it's crucial to have the right council team officer on board. Support from your local councillors is essentially. Luckily, ours were extremely supportive. Find out if there are any other local partners that can be involved. Are there any local initiatives or relevant works planned locally? This could be housing association improvements, other regeneration plans or cycle pathway projects, etc. Think about your time frame. Understand how long you will actually need for any project that focuses on infrastructure changes and have a project plan that appropriately reflects this. The local authority will then arrange for installation. This can take from a week to several months. It's important to have that conversation early in the process about their capacity to carry out the installation. They may have access to a social justice team who are authorised to do this type of work, or they may be using their own staff. The initial site visit. Arrange a walkabout with the local authority officer and community representative to review potential locations and check on land ownerships and other issues, such as proximity to utilities and trees, and then agree final bench locations, based on your findings from the community consultation and identified budget. Written agreements are required. If land is owned by a partner, you will need their permission to install a bench. Obtain a signed written agreement from the landowner. This should be signed by your project manager for future reference if required. One council team referred the installation on council land to their legal team for written agreement. Liability issues. If the local authority installs the benches, hopefully there should be no problems regarding liability. However, in one local authority, this became a major discussion point. Covering costs. Identify your funding source and budget. If the project does not have a budget, consider supporting the project group to work in partnership with another existing or constituted community group, for example, a community council, to prepare and submit a funding bid for a community grant or similar. Discuss with them if they will charge for any installation or only unit costs. The type of materials and the number of benches will be driven by the available budget. These costs will also vary depending on location, for example, the type of terrain, type of ground and ground preparation work involved. Purchase and installation of benches. If all has gone to plan, the local authority or other partner will purchase the benches in line with their procurement procedures and can then include any other cost, for example, installation, and send a final invoice to the community group or organisation. Be aware of different types of benches and if there are any ongoing maintenance costs. And finally, installation and celebration. Celebrate your new benches with the local press and media coverage. So now we've heard about one group's challenging experience, we'd like to hear from you. We're now going into our breakout rooms and we'd like you to discuss how do we turn aspiration into reality? What can I or my organisation do? Who else needs to be involved? Who's key in changing, improving walking infrastructure? How do we get them to join the conversation? And can we develop a guide for local authorities on benches, toilets and other capital projects? Do you know of any local authorities that have clear process to apply to make small infrastructure changes in your local community? Do you have any positive examples of how small infrastructure changes have progressed in your locality? And how can we actively encourage the active travel sector to include small infrastructure changes in their work? Small infrastructure changes are just as crucial as big developments. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Chloe. That was really, really informative. I hadn't actually seen the video yet, so that was a premiere for me as well. And it doesn't quite show the amount of effort that went in from the community and the support they also got from Living Street staff. But this was a community-led activity, and it did take us a long time. So that was just a little bit of a flavour, and we'd hopefully you can get more insights. We're not naming local authorities because we think this is across all local authorities, and we worked with a couple and we had different experiences in both, but there was certain themes that we picked up on. So we don't want to pick on anybody. We think this is just a general problem that we want to find answers to and be constructive in terms of how you do these things. So that's the theme for the discussion groups. I'd ask everybody to be back in about 10 minutes or so, if that's possible. When you return, you should be in your breakout groups, and then we'll have a discussion for 20 minutes, half an hour or so, and then return for the plenary and hopefully share the learning across the whole group. Okay, so thank you. I'll see you in 10 minutes. Okay, thank you. Thank you for your patience. Sorry, we've had technical issues today. We had a late substitute who's trying to manage our tech because of an absence today, so it hasn't quite worked, but we tried our best, and hopefully you still got into your discussion groups and had a decent discussion. So it's now an opportunity just to hear back from the discussions. I was in a couple of groups and had some quite interesting thoughts about the complexity of street management and what you see as a bench, a council sees as an asset class, and an asset class comes with all sorts of implications in terms of forward maintenance and responsibilities. So that was something that was an interesting learning point for me. But we'll have another look at what other people are saying. Anne, do you want to go first in terms of your group?
Yes, I have to apologise to everybody, including especially my group. That was the worst facilitation I have ever done. I got overexcited and I don't think I could stop myself talking. So I just talked at people for half an hour, and the fact that they've even come back into the breakout room says more about them than me. Thank you so much, and please feel free to add into the discussion at any point. We had a brilliant chat, I thought, when I did let other people speak. And we had a conversation about the need to think about disabilities as well, and inclusion, and you know, and how that came out of our work. The fact that people don't really know what walking infrastructure means, and I'm really interested to hear more about the asset class, because I think there's lots of hidden barriers. And I think from what my learning has been is that the reason that there aren't any processes is because it's not clear, it's, you know, who needs to be involved and how you would get a process. We didn't get as far as the final question, which is actually, I think, really important about, you know, would people be interested in exploring that a bit more, to see if we can come up with a bit of a blueprint that could be worked with local authorities to say, this is what we need to do. I know from our work in North Lanarkshire with putting a gate in a fence and a spur path to connect that gate, that where the gate was, to the main path, that took 5 different local authority departments to get that done, because we needed to speak to lighting, who were separate from roads maintenance, but we also need to speak to parks, and it was also because it was where it was, we needed to involve housing. And you know, and now the local authority in that situation, they coordinated that for us, which was brilliant, and we were able to do that there. But all of these things show the complexity of it. And again, and I think so the question we never quite got to in our group was, you know, would it be useful for some of us from here, from another colleagues, get involved in actually saying, what would it look like to have a guide to getting walking infrastructure changes? So hopefully other people have answered that. So we had a great discussion, but my feedback is terrible, because I was a terrible facilitator. If anybody else in my groups wants to now take a chance to say something, please feel free to do that.
Okay, I'm sure it was great. I'm going to move on to Robert. Were you scribing, or you got some feedback from us?
I was, yes. We had a wide-ranging discussion, so I don't think I can easily summarise in any kind of particular key point. But some of the interesting points that were made, we were talking about the size of the problem. Talking about dropped curbs in one local authority, and a current project or a very recent project to install 15 in a mapped, where the mapped problem is a need for 70,000. So there's something I think that's incredibly important about that. Something
that was actually 17,000.
17,000. Okay.
Still big enough.
We have something which I feel I'm already interested in myself, which is about I think I see a lack of assessment of the problem. So we might map dropped curbs, but is there any local authority out there at all at the moment mapping? I didn't say this, but this is from my own work, mapping passive surveillance, for example, areas lacking passive surveillance. Do we know of any single local authority anywhere in the whole of the country, the whole of the United Kingdom, which has mapped passive surveillance, given that that's such a hugely important thing for...
Do you want to quickly define it, because there may be folk who...
Yeah, sorry. Passive surveillance meaning essentially the idea that a street can feel much more welcoming if there are windows of occupied buildings looking out onto it, compared to a street where there are no windows, no kind of occupied buildings. And we had a discussion about, whether this is a top-down approach or a bottom-up approach, the differences between those things. If you ask local people what they're interested in, they'll tell you one thing. If you ask experts, they'll tell you something else, and something about those things meeting in the middle. Kate, anything else to add?
Oh, we talked about, making sure that you have different perspectives. So yes, we know absolutely that the folk who have the hardest time using the infrastructure are the best people to ask about getting it right. But also we talked about teenagers and young people's perspectives, and also the crucial aspect of bringing people together in the community to talk about whether there might be clashing perceptions. So, are people afraid of teenagers gathering on a bench versus teenagers really welcoming that, and so on. So the community discussion, but making sure that community discussion brings in perspectives that might be perceived to be clashing in some ways.
Okay, who else do we have that is to report back from groups? How many groups have we done? Cynthia is going to speak next.
Right, okay, so this was Graham's group, and we spent a lot of time talking about two different sort of sides of the spectrum. One where things seem to go very naturally, very organically, in a very streamlined system, and the other side where attempting to get benches put in, even though they were following a similar line to another council, was so frustrating that it still hasn't been done, and the people actually afraid almost of approaching it again because it gives them collywobbles. So on one side, Paul was talking about how, because he's working with the community and local authority partnership relationship, that first of all, they have precedent that in almost every project they've done, benches have appeared. So there is that kind of precedent, but it's not brought in at the beginning. It's brought in after the mapping of all the social networking and stuff that is done in the area. And because the local authority and the community are working on an agreed partnership project, there is almost an internal process that makes it very easy to put in a cost-effective bench. And I'll actually quote this. A bench that doesn't need to be bolted and locked down with concrete and stuff, but is attached to a plant block. So that's a metal planter that is filled with plants and soil and very heavy, and simply locked through it with a motorbike chain, security chain to that. So it's very difficult to move if you just want to move it to steal it or something. But it's very easy to move in terms of a local authority wanting to shift it if the local authority find it's in the wrong place, or the community doesn't want it there, or whatever. So it's both placeable and pretty secure. And that costs around £500, even with a rather large, heavy planter. So that's the good idea. And also where other projects have a long-standing relationship in terms of environmental stuff in the Northeast, we had similar things. The other side was that if you are trying to replicate something like the rainbow benches, even with the precedent, it's not necessarily as easy when you have somebody who is a block, somebody who is demanding information, and the people who are providing the potential benches can't actually speak Councilese. So they're being asked, well, what material is the bench? Because in the council's mind, it mustn't be pine, it's got to be this, it's got to be that. And the person who was making the benches was just making the benches, and had no problem with the local authority with whom they were working, but trying to replicate this in another authority, there wasn't that awareness of what was going on, and it became a case of you need to have a spec. You need, as you're saying, Stuart, they became asset classes rather than thinking. I've never noticed a bench being maintained in my life. And I'm now 61, so. But I think what we felt was that there was a need for redesigning community spaces in general. There was an accessibility issue and also an equalities issue for mothers with young children or parents with young children. And also maybe there's an appetite for something like a national benches approach that sets the precedents, but also makes the process simpler. So just in the same way as there was a national COVID rollout approach for getting your testers, maybe a national benches approach could actually create the template that was needed for this. And I'll shut up, but does anyone want to add anything?
Okay, we can come back in plenary actually if anybody does want to. There's a few questions I might ask the group. And I think, Chloe, were you the last person to come back?
Thanks, Stuart. So we had an interesting discussion as well. So we agreed that there doesn't seem to be a clear process. Apart from Stirling Council, Bridget Vallon seems to be absolutely flying. So hopefully the person in our group is going to be able to feed back why Stirling Council and Bridget Vallon are doing so well. We talked about the need for good guidance and outcomes. That could be even covering things about where benches or walking infrastructure should be placed, that kind of outline. We talked about the need for a partnership approach. One of our group members said an interesting point actually, that actually is there a need for a change of language from everyday walking to essential walking, and how that actually has an impact on what people are actually thinking about. So for example, does that impact where walking funding is directed? So the West Highland Way in comparison to actually putting benches or infrastructure changes within a town setting area. So that's a really interesting point of view that I think we'll take on board. There's also that perception of the additional burden and maintenance costs to councils as well. The impact that has, that could be around social, antisocial behaviour as well. But I managed to get 2 of our group members kind of signed up that they would like to take forward the process. So I've written down your names so you can't escape. So we'll take that forward. So thank you very much, Stuart.
Okay, thank you. That was I joined that group, and I think I did like this idea about talking about essential walking and essential walking infrastructure. And we did get a bit of criticism for using the word everyday walking and making it sound a little bit humdrum, as it's just something everybody does, and actually talking about it being essential. I quite like that. There's a few things where we can maybe discuss. I think there's something about this needs to fit with other processes. There's a lot of other stuff going on, and this just does seem to slip through the net. It doesn't seem to get very small things that communities want. There is not a responsive way. In the group I was in, there's somebody from Sustrans, and that as part of larger infrastructure schemes, benches will be installed if that's what communities want, but you would have to have that. There's no parallel program if you just want a bench on its own, which I think is interesting. I have a concern, I suppose, about creating more guidance and toolkits and all this sort of stuff, and whether that makes life easier or more difficult. I think that needs to come with a change of culture and the way organisations organise themselves and respond to communities. Actually, I think we need to be careful with that. That's just a personal view. I'm going to throw that out there and see if anybody comes back. I think there's so much policy out there at the moment that doesn't seem to be cutting through. And do we really want to add to that side of things?
Do we need more best practice that isn't followed? That's the big question.
Yes. Anne, were you going to come in on that point?
Yeah, I think it's possibly a guidance to how to start the conversation rather than a how to do it is kind of, because I suspect that rather than every group having to have the same conversation with their local authority and start from the same point, if there was a way of speeding that up or saying these are the things. So because I think you're right, just, we could do we did create the guide to getting better streets and pavements as a hint for support for people who wanted to report things to their councils or ask for small improvements. And I think that's been helpful and well received. But I think it's the next level. It's understanding the things like, concerns, because we came across this a lot about the concerns of it being maintenance and actually if it's recycled, it's very low maintenance and so on. But it's about starting the conversations and what questions keep coming up and what things need to be addressed and which departments need to be involved and who might be the decision makers, or if the fact that there aren't any decision makers because it's not clear whose department it is. That's maybe where we need to go with it, because rather than just an actual toolkit of how to put in a bench.
Yeah, I think that's, that's not to say that some training would be quite good. I think that might be what's maybe needed, taking some of the lessons from this project, but there's probably other lessons. And I think what Living Streets would really value is people and local authorities. If Stirling Council are really good at that, getting Stirling Council sharing that information. And I do think that some of the networks that were available and opportunities for professional development and formal have been eroded over the last 10 years. That council officers had more opportunities to get together. They are now cut to the bone in terms of what they're trying to do. And I think this is sitting in the background of this. And I do have a concern that whenever you try and get a small improvement, it might seem like but it is just another thing that people are dealing with and they can't deal with the big stuff. And it's kind of like, actually, do you know how difficult this process will be to get one bench? I need to, do this piece of procurement to get 15 of my 17,000 drop curbs done, and that's going to take me the next 6 months. So, yeah, this is not an easy area, but I think it's something we need to start to unpick and work on, because it's the walking environment is becoming degraded and it's not really improving in many places, apart from the back of really Sustrans supported schemes. I think that's the chink of light in this. And then there is other individual initiatives on more streetscape, which are town centre focused, which again are good. I think there's a suburbia problem here, but I'm just throwing stuff out there to see if we get any response. If anybody else has a thoughts on this, we can stop the discussion and let everybody get away. But I'm keen, just while we've got everybody that's stuck with us through this, to hear your views about this issue.
Hi, Stuart.
Yeah.
Hello there. Oh, hi. It's Paul here from Sustrans, and hello to Robert, who hopefully is still on the call. I haven't seen him forever. I was just going to say, I love benches, and I hope most of Sustrans does as well. Where we can, we advocate for them, I think. There's some really good there's some really good background reading on benches, which is called the Bench Project, which is online, and also you can download it. It's really accessible, and it gives a really good argument for benches, not just as in somewhere to sit, but there's an inclusivity element to it, but also a social justice element to benches. So I totally recommend everyone looking for that. It's called the Bench Project. It's all online. And For us, it doesn't seem that hard to get benches in, but then we're already working with local authorities, I think, to do that. So I appreciate it might be more challenging for other people, but I think we've definitely found some low cost ways of getting stuff in. So I'd be happy to share that with anyone. So.
That's really, had Elaine Richardson was wanting to speak, and Emily after that.
Hi, mine's was really just a kind of a follow-up point, just to reiterate some of the things that you were saying. I'd started an email last week after the session last week, just talking about the whole, maybe the need for CPD. And it was just, it reminded me when you mentioned it there, that I think that might be a good way of kind of bringing folk together in a very sort of non-adversarial kind of way, and highlighting to folk, you know, kind of give them a free lunch if they're in the room together, or have it something that's a seminar that's sort of online, that is aimed at local authorities, and get the local authorities that are doing well to be able to share their experience. So it's coming from within the local authority that's kind of passing that information over. And I know that this is all stuff that you know already, but I was flabbergasted to hear about groups being asked for utility plans, and for the groups to be out and kind of trying to chase up landowner agreements and things. It just seems like that's not the job really of groups. And I don't imagine it's going to be consistent across all of the local authorities in Scotland. And it would be really nice to kind of have a kind of an example of, you know, this is how you do it. And, you know, then people in local communities can refer to that, saying, well, this is what's happening elsewhere. Because I think there are lots of people trying to do this, but we're all kind of isolated doing it. So it would be a really nice opportunity, I think, to be able to pull kind of knowledge and just reiterate how important it is to get buy-in from the council, because I yeah, so sorry, it's kind of reiterating points that have already been said, but it was maybe just to kind of highlight that, yes, I do think that seems really important.
Can I just say,
yeah.
are really important to this community, not just this group, but the community had said, we want these benches. So that's why the Out and About group just felt, right, okay, we'll take it, you know, and they did everything. They, you know, because the things that they were being asked to do were technical, and they had to get, you know, their own knowledge and skills up to be able to achieve that. But as you say, it shouldn't be that difficult.
Yeah, so, I think the group did a wonderful job. They absolutely did, but there's no way it should be that hard for folk. I mean, they were great to stand their ground and to keep going.
Yeah.
So,
and I think that, sorry to jump in as well, and here that reiterates your point, Elaine, that actually having that learning from other places to share with because trying to put, you know, we had the councillors putting pressure on the council in that situation to try and nothing and I think being it for the group to say, actually, they've done it in these other areas, we should be able to ask for that. I think that's important, that, you know, I totally take on board Stuart's points that, you know, for many councils, it is about capacity and resource. It wasn't because people are bad and they wake up in the morning and say, how can I make a community group's life difficult today? But but for lots of pressures and not realising that benches are a big thing. I think when you know, in the bench film, it says, you know, the councillor there, Claire, says, you know, she thought it's just a bench, but actually then she realised just how important it was. And I think there's something about getting that message over, that this makes a genuine difference. And you know, the more we're trying to tackle climate change, the more we're trying to get people to live locally, the more we're trying to meet these things, we have to change something, and it needs to come up the agenda and not fall through the cracks. So thanks, Elaine.
I'm going to bring in Emily Hislop, who was there a second ago.
Yes, hiya, sorry.
Sorry for the wait.
That's okay. Mine's on a slightly different point, but just to see if anyone had heard of the website fixmystreet.com. So it's kind of a website. It's not a council run website, but it's a website that sends problems about people's street directly to their local authority. So you can put pictures up of broken benches, of potholes, of streets, of pavements that are broken, and you know, there's lots about potholes in the roads and things like that. But just as another way that groups can almost flood the council with, this is the thing that's really important on my street, you know, this is a bench that needs to be sorted now. I don't know what it would be like in terms of installing new benches, but in terms of maintaining old ones, perhaps that's something to let groups know about as well.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and we also have a guide to better streets, which is on our website. We still have hard copies of. Is there any community groups that want copies of this, or any councils or any organisation? We are actually moving office next Monday, so I'm happy to post out copies of our guide to anybody that wants them. So that's just a sort of plug.
Can I interject there, Stuart, to say yes, and thanks, Emily, because Fix My Street, we mentioned that in our guide as one of the routes to go down, but you're absolutely right. It's fine for asking for things that are there to be fixed, but there's no, and that's again, so, you know, there are mechanisms to ask for things to be fixed, but there are no mechanisms that we are aware of unless you're part of a much larger project, of just saying, do you know what, I could do with a bench there. I'll just phone the council, or I'll just go to that website and say, hey, can I have a bench there? That is just not a possibility, and as far as I've come across anywhere.
So the equivalent of clicking on the memorial benches procedure and going a new bench procedure.
So you couldn't just put up on there, this is where we need a bench, you know, even, do you think even that wouldn't get sent through to the council through that website? Or
it just wouldn't get processed because they don't know what to do with it. They'd be like, aye, very good, who's going to pay for it? Because they generally, who's going to pay for it, who's going to maintain it, who's going to do this, and the maintenance can be very easily dealt with. And actually, who's going to pay for it is usually fairly easily dealt with, because there are always pockets of funding. There is funding available. You sometimes have to apply for it. And again, I think it should be part of, there's lots of money being thrown at active travel at the moment, but unless you're part of a massive project, you know, why there should be, some of that money should be set aside, I think, that's my suggestion, for just small infrastructure changes, including benches, so that whilst we've got active travel money, whilst we've got climate change money, whilst we've got COVID recovery money, whilst we've got mental health money, some of that should be, oh, okay, we'll put that in a pot, and that's for small walking infrastructure that means people can get out, and this is how you access it, and you don't have to have a massive project. You just say,
okay,
this is what we want.
Somebody's got a microphone on. Sorry, we're getting feedback, but I think that seems to stopped. Right, I'm just quickly make a point about funding, because there is a lot of funding out there, and this project that we ended up backed on wasn't really, but we had the funding available. So from day one, it was 20k, which actually was quite difficult to persuade the lottery to give us for capital works, because they said we think that councils should do this off their own bat, and we said, well, they won't, so give us 20k and we'll see how we get on. So that was part of it was a test and learn project, and this is what we've learned. So actually, I think there's a good point that there is funding for benches. It's probably one of the easier things to find funding for, and it's more the processes that I think are lacking.
Can I come in there, Stuart,
yeah, sure.
Just for 2 seconds? We fund Paths for All, the Community Paths Fund. And I'm just wondering, when those paths are being put in, do Paths for All think about putting benches in as part of that project? That's question one. And to answer Anna's question there about smaller infrastructure projects. There's absolutely nothing stopping local authorities bidding for money from Sustrans, from the Places for People, or Places for Everyone project, and including benches and including artworks and including anything that makes the public realm that bit much more pleasant to spend time in. So I don't think there's any barriers there. And as she says, there's a lot of money being invested in active travel at the moment, and we would encourage bids of all shapes and sizes to come into Sustrans to be assessed against any other bids that come in.
Thanks, Karen.
So some of it is about making sure that the issue of what walking infrastructure is comes right up the agenda, so that everybody's thinking about it every time.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a
We'd
few
like
people
to see more walking bids, actually.
That's a challenge. Let's do it.
I'm looking to colleagues from Paths for All, if they're there, could say a little bit more about their Paths funding, some of the other funding they have at the moment. So I think Ian's there. Are you able to help on that one?
I mean, I wonder if Richard or Graham might be better placed to answer that, because they're directly involved in that funding. So.
Hi, yeah, it's Richard speaking. Yeah, as part of our Community Paths grant, we can look at installing benches, and we have kind of funded quite a number of projects in the past where groups have kind of installed benches as part of kind of path projects and things like that. So yes, it is something that we can do.
Excellent. Right.
That's through our Community Paths grants, and they'll be opening in around about May time.
Excellent. So there is some opportunities for funding. I hope we haven't put people off. I hope we motivate people to say this is worth doing. Is there any other contributions? We're at 11:30, and I said we would finish well before 12. So, because I'll start rounding things up, but I'm keen while we've got everybody together just to hear from you any views. We're going to have a difficult job sort of writing this up. The plan is to splice the two videos onto our website for the first one, which was more strategic, and this one, which is kind of much more specific to give it. So we'll try and get that up there. I've taken quite a lot away from today, and I thought I would probably learn more today than in our first seminar, in the sense the first seminar kind of summed up what we already knew about the problems, where gets down to the real things that are that stop things happening at a micro level. I think one of the things is that we do need walking to be more prominent in other plans, so benches are identified in other documents around community in terms of place plans, active travel plans, transport plans. So I think that I've taken that away as there is mechanisms out there, but this stuff isn't obviously filtering through. So that's something that would be good, and I think that it's encouraging that where there is projects, we are delivering this infrastructure. It's just about creating the type of project, and it needs to be done on scale. I think the idea of going to councils with a one-off bench project, they're just not geared up to do that, which is sad. But I think that's where we are on that level. I did take a note something about national procurement, that there might be something around about having access to types of benches that are available and meet all the standards that you need, so communities can just get a hold of the right types of things, and that would break down one barrier. There's another couple of things we put in. One of them is land ownership. Actually, the streets can be quite constrained, and any bits of green space may not be in council ownership. And I think we duck around this as an active travel movement, the links with land ownership and the how fiddly this is, and the barriers. And I think a lot of design is actually compromised. There's more space out there if it could be got, but I think the effort and the time needed to do it means that doesn't happen. So this is a sort of perfect piece of infrastructure to put on a bit of green verge, but if that's not in the council ownership, that's a problem. And there is not. So I think we need to come back on that. I think there is also a discussion about public liability and that's another barrier that came up in some of the discussions. I don't think benches are particularly dangerous in themselves. I was not really involved in this project, but it escalated to me at one stage because we were at the final stage, and we were gifting the benches to one of the sites, and it wasn't the council ownership, it was another organisation who were fearful that we would pursue them. Well, first of all, they wanted Living Streets to take on the liability for maintenance in perpetuity, which I said I couldn't do. It's not what we do as a charity. It's just that, you know, so we negotiated that out of the way, and then secondly said, well, what happens if they do break? We're landed with this asset, and it could be dangerous. And we got around that and said, well, we'll do our best to site them in places where they won't be dangerous. And if you can just, if you do have other assets, can you just look at them alongside other assets without any specific liability or requirement on you? But it did take quite a lot of negotiation to do that. But there is a bit of a debate about that sort of side, and there's a fear, I think, amongst some officers about taking on an asset that somebody else that then becomes a liability, whether it's for maintenance or safety later on. And again, we probably need to discuss that, because that's a cultural issue we have at the moment. And again, we're not, so these are particular topics we maybe need to think about, and that's maybe something about, again, about CPD and discussions amongst groups. So I'm going to add that in just on top of what we've all discussed. We will try and write this up. We will try and provide a sort of simple note on what we've learned and circulate it. We will be continuing to work on 20-minute neighbourhood projects, thanks to our funder from Transport Scotland. We've got a couple of projects in North Lanarkshire, and we've got a project in Stirling, and we've also got some funding from the Loves Local Fund and Pass for All Smart Choices to do work in this area. So we will continue working in this area and plugging away and passing on the learning. We're keen to hear from other people and what their experiences are on this, and we really do want people to help us in terms of what some of the answers could be. And as I said, there's a few options and issues that we think, you know, could be cracked. So thank you for your time. Thank you to the team that pulled it together and the team that made the video, and all the project partners that were involved in getting there, and especially the communities. We will be having another event in about a month's time, which will be radical changes for streets, making it happen, which is kind of about this theme. And we'll be bringing a range of speakers together to look at what can be done. How do we really push walking forward? So please join us for that. We'll be hopefully sending out save the date in the next week. We're just finalising a few of the speakers, and we won't. It's not going to just be the usual suspects. We've looked for some interesting and different speakers this time around, just to have a real debate on how we move these issues forward. Because there is definitely a challenge with walking that we need to discuss and we need to move on. So please work with us on that, and keep putting in work with other partners as well, with Sustrans, who are keen to fund these things, and Paths for All. And I think we can transform communities, and I think we can make it easier to do so. So thanks for that. I think this is the start of a conversation rather than the end, and I'll leave it there. Thank you.